They said the war would be fought with missiles and machines, but what they never expected was the war of truth. Today, you're not just watching another headline unravel, you're witnessing a moment that could change the course of history. Iran has spoken, not in whispers, not in retreat, but with a deadline so bold, it shook the very ground beneath the world's strongest powers. This isn't just politics. This is the story of a nation refusing to kneel, a people rising through pressure, and a truth so raw that even the silence can't hide it anymore. Stay with me because by the end of this video, you won't just understand what happened. You'll feel why it matters. You'll see how one decision, one voice, and one act of defiance could ignite a storm the world is not ready for. This is where the illusion ends and reality begins. When Iran gave America a deadline, it wasn't a bluff, a threat, or just another statement in a long list of diplomatic warnings. It was a moment soaked in history, built from decades of pressure, betrayal, sanctions, and silence. This deadline was a declaration that Iran would no longer participate in a game where the rules were written to keep it down. It was a line carved deep into the ground, not with arrogance, but with clarity. A line that said, from this moment forward, we choose the terms of our dignity. Cross this and you'll see what standing firm really looks like. For years, Iran watched as its words were twisted, its intentions misrepresented, and its sovereignty violated under the guise of global order. But still, it played the diplomatic game. It showed restraint. It tried to be heard in rooms where it was never truly welcome. It engaged in talks while its scientists were assassinated. Its people were sanctioned into suffering, and its name was dragged through the dirt. But every nation has its threshold. And this deadline, this bold, unapologetic message was that threshold. This wasn't about nuclear programs or proxy alliances anymore. This was about principle, about saying, you can no longer keep moving the goalposts and expect us to chase it. Iran was no longer reacting. It was confronting. It was choosing to look the superpower in the eye and say, we're not afraid of war, because we've already survived everything you threw at us to avoid one. To the outside world, it looked like a sudden escalation, but to those who had been watching closely, it was a long time coming. This deadline was forged in the fires of broken promises. From the JCPOA withdrawal to the murder of General Qasem Soleimani, to the unending silence over crimes committed in Palestine. It was the voice of a nation that's been waiting, warning, and watching, finally rising to say, if you keep crossing lines, we won't draw them anymore. We'll defend them. And that's why this moment matters. Because when a nation with every reason to fear chooses to confront instead, the world changes. The atmosphere shifts. The illusion of control breaks. The balance of power tips. Iran didn't just give a deadline, it gave the world a moment of truth. A line in the sand that may very well shape the future of global resistance and redefine what courage looks like on the international stage. Iran has spent decades playing defense, from covert attacks on its nuclear scientists to crushing economic sanctions. From media propaganda to direct military confrontations, it has weathered every kind of pressure designed to force submission. And yet, through all of it, Iran remains steady, often calculated, waiting, holding back. But something has shifted. That patience, that restraint has reached its end. The tone has changed. The posture has changed. And now the world is witnessing a nation that's no longer content with just enduring. Iran is stepping forward, not recklessly, but with purpose. It's ready to lead the charge because defending itself quietly has brought no peace. And now it's time to expose the true face of those who have long tried to crush it in the shadows. This isn't just about retaliation. It's about reclaiming space. Reclaiming the right to dictate the terms of its own security. Iran isn't sending empty warnings anymore. It's setting timelines. It's shaping the narrative. It's forcing the world to acknowledge that its tolerance was never weakness. It was strategy. A strategy that has now reached its next phase. Taking control. Iran understands that silence invites further aggression. And in the absence of justice, strength must speak. Not to instigate war, but to end the cycle of humiliation that diplomacy alone could never fix. There is a distinct clarity now in Iran's actions. No more subtle maneuvering, no more mixed messages. Iran is done playing on someone else's terms. It's done being the nation constantly on trial in Western eyes while the real criminals enjoy impunity. This readiness to lead the charge is not driven by desperation. It's born out of a growing confidence. Iran has built alliances, gained technological strength, and fortified its internal will. It's respected in places that once looked down on it. It's no longer begging for inclusion. It's commanding attention. What makes this moment so defining is that it reveals how much power lies in the decision to no longer wait. Iran has waited long enough for fairness, for dialogue, for truth. And now, by choosing confrontation when necessary, by stepping forward rather than shrinking back, Iran is rewriting the rules of engagement. It's telling the world that peace is not found in endless submission, but sometimes in decisive strength. That leadership doesn't always look like compromise. It sometimes looks like bold defiance when all other options have been exhausted. Iran is ready to lead not just in defense of itself, but in defense of every voice that's ever been silenced, every people ever told to stay down. It's standing, and history is watching. This moment between Iran and the United States is not just a military standoff. It's a mirror reflecting something far bigger. It's the story of power versus principle, of arrogance versus endurance, of injustice being confronted by a voice that refuses to stay silent. This isn't just about Iran firing back or drawing red lines. It's about a truth the world has avoided for far too long, that much of the so-called global order is built on double standards. The ones who speak of peace are the same ones dropping bombs. The ones who demand accountability turn blind when children in Gaza scream under rubble. And the ones who claim to defend human rights use sanctions as weapons that starve innocent people. In this clash, Iran becomes more than just a nation. It becomes a symbol of resistance, and its confrontation with the U.S. becomes the battleground between justice and hypocrisy. America has long positioned itself as the global police, the keeper of order, the voice of moral clarity. But Iran's challenge strips that illusion bare. When a nation that has endured so much stands up and says, "More," the world is forced to ask questions it's been too afraid to face. Why are some nations allowed to build arsenals unchecked while others are strangled for the same pursuit? Why are some lives mourned globally while others are buried in silence? Iran's defiance is not just defiance. It's a spotlight. And that spotlight is blinding the world with a painful truth. The game is rigged, and the players are waking up. This confrontation has shaken the very idea that power equals righteousness. Because for once the oppressed are not cowering. For once, someone is standing toe-to-toe with a bully and refusing to back down. That changes everything. It gives courage to those who have been silent. It gives language to those who have only felt pain. And it forces the world to confront a new possibility. That resistance is not terrorism. That standing up is not a crime. And that speaking truth to power is not a threat, but a responsibility. Iran's bold move exposes a deep fear in the hearts of those who profit from silence. Because if one nation can challenge the narrative, others might follow. If one country can say, "We won't play by your rules," then the whole illusion begins to crack. And in that crack, truth finds its way through. That's what this is really about. Not missiles or borders, but meaning. A fight between the empire of fear and the uprising of faith. A war between those who manipulate and those who finally refuse to be manipulated. In that sense, Iran's voice is more than resistance. It is justice finally speaking. With a thunder the world cannot ignore. For decades, unity among Muslim nations has been more of a dream than a reality. Spoken about in conferences, repeated in Friday's sermons, but rarely seen in action. Differences in politics, leadership, and legions have fractured the imam, allowing external powers to exploit those divisions with ease. But something about Iran's latest stance has shifted the landscape with one bold deadline. With one refusal to bend, Iran has triggered a ripple across the Muslim world. A ripple that's waking up long, dormant voices, because when one nation dares to say enough, others begin to question why they ever stayed quiet. Iran's courage is not just being watched. It's becoming contagious. This isn't about every Muslim nation suddenly agreeing on every issue. It's about something deeper, something spiritual. It's about the realization that silence in the face of injustice is no longer an option. That neutrality in the face of oppression is complicity. Iran's firmness is reminding the Muslim world that dignity is not a Western gift. It's a divine right. And that right is worth defending, even if it comes at a cost. When one nation stands firm while surrounded by threats, others begin to remember that their own strength was never in weapons or wealth, but in faith, in principles, and in unity. The potential for real Muslim unity is no longer confined to symbolic gestures. As Iran draws its line and prepares to face the full force of opposition, more nations are being forced to pick a side not based on fear, but on truth. Do they align with those who fund destruction and mock their faith? Or do they stand with the ones who refuse to be silent anymore? That's a decision being made in every capital, every masjid, every household, where Muslims are watching events unfold and asking themselves what role they will play when history looks back. Iran's stance has exposed something powerful, that a united Muslim voice terrifies those who rely on division to maintain control. When Muslim nations speak together, not in hatred but in justice, they can shake even the most arrogant empires. Iran is becoming a mirror for the Ummah, showing what's possible when fear is replaced with faith, when compromise is replaced with courage, and when ego is set aside for the sake of collective honor. The more Iran stands, the more that possibility grows. What was once a far-off idea, 40 nations standing as one, now feels closer than ever. Because unity doesn't always begin with meetings and treaties. Sometimes it begins with one nation saying, "We will not bow," and others finally lifting their heads to say, "Neither will we." For many years, America's greatest weapon wasn't just its military might or its financial influence. It was fear of punishment, fear of isolation, fear of being labeled an enemy of democracy. Nations obeyed not just because they agreed, but because they were afraid. Afraid of what would happen if they didn't comply. But today, Iran has stripped that illusion bare. It has stood through sanctions, cyber attacks, assassinations, economic warfare, and media defamation. And yet it still stands, still speaks, still resists. That's what makes this moment different. Iran is no longer afraid. And when fear disappears, everything changes. The balance of power starts to shift. The narrative starts to crack. The voice that was once silenced begins to echo louder than ever before. Iran has endured every tactic meant to break it. Economic sanctions designed to cripple its economy, only force it to become more self-reliant. Covert operations meant to sabotage its infrastructure, only pushed it to innovate and protect itself from within. Diplomatic isolation intended to shame it only revealed the double standards of the so-called global order. And each time Iran was hit, something extraordinary happened. It didn't break. It grew tougher. It grew smarter. It became immune to the intimidation that once silenced so many others. And now that immunity is showing, not just in Iran's words, but in its actions, in the way it confronts power without flinching, in the way it sets deadlines and stands behind them, in the way it refuses to compromise its dignity for the comfort of being left alone. America's biggest concern now is not Iran's weapons or alliances. It's Iran's example. Because when one nation shows the world that fear is a choice, others start to choose differently. Other nations, once too afraid to speak, begin to whisper. Those whispers turn to questions, and those questions eventually become defiance. Iran's strength is exposing a truth that the architects of control have worked hard to bury. That obedience rooted in fear can only last so long. Eventually, someone will stop being afraid. And when that happens, the entire structure begins to tremble. This isn't about one nation standing tall. It's about what that courage awakens in others. Iran's defiance is inspiring not because it's perfect, but because it's real. Because it reminds us that fear can be defeated. That the world's so-called superpowers are only as powerful as the silence they can impose. But when a voice rises from the rubble and refuses to stay quiet, it breaks the spell. And right now, Iran is breaking that spell in front of the whole world, not just for itself, but for every nation, every people, and every soul that ever wondered if it was possible to stand up and still survive. The world is arriving at a crossroads, where neutrality is no longer a refuge and silence is no longer safe. The events unfolding between Iran and the United States are more than headlines. They are revelations. As Iran draws a bold line, and the threat of direct confrontation rises, People across nations are being forced to confront uncomfortable truths that have long been buried under politics and propaganda. This moment is peeling back the layers of global diplomacy to reveal something raw and undeniable. The systems we've trusted for justice have been deeply compromised, and the voices we were told to fear are often the ones telling the truth. Iran's unflinching stance is exposing those contradictions in broad daylight, and the world is finally paying attention. For too long, the global narrative has been shaped by those who speak the loudest and own the biggest stages. They've told us who the enemy is, what freedom looks like, and which voices deserve to be heard. But that control is slipping. Iran's defiance, its refusal to bow, its decision to set a deadline and hold firm. These aren't just political moves, they are acts of revelation. They force us to ask why injustice in some countries is headline news while genocide in others is barely mentioned. Why nuclear weapons in one nation are called necessary deterrents while the same ambition in another is labeled a global threat. Why some lives matter more than others based on the flag they were born under. This is the painful truth the Muslim world, and much of the broader global South has long felt, but rarely seen. So openly acknowledge. Iran's challenge is forcing the mask to fall off the face of global order. It's revealing that peace has often been dictated by the powerful at the expense of the oppressed. It's making it harder for nations to stay silent, and for people to look away. Because this isn't just about military tension anymore. It's about a moral reckoning. But realizing that the structures we've accepted as fair have been anything but, that the rules weren't made to protect justice, they were made to protect power. Now, as Iran moves with resolve and the threat of direct war looms, the world is being called to a moment of clarity. Every bomb dropped, every deadline issued, every decision made from this point forward carries with it the weight of truth. A truth that can no longer be hidden, no matter how many media outlets try to blur it. Iran is not just defying a superpower, it is dragging global hypocrisy into the light. And whether you agree with every stance it takes or not, one thing is clear. You cannot ignore it anymore. The time for comfortable distance has ended. The world must now choose whether it will continue to protect illusion, or finally face the truth, staring back at it with unblinking eyes. This wasn't just about Iran giving a deadline. It was about a nation that finally said more. A line drawn in history, not with ink, but with courage. Iran stood up not to provoke war, but to expose a lie. To show the world that silence cannot be the answer to injustice, and fear cannot be the foundation of peace. For too long, the powerful decided who was right and who was wrong. But now, the voices they tried to silence are echoing across the globe, loud, bolder, unafraid. Iran's message isn't just for its enemies. It's for every oppressed soul who thought they were alone. It's for every nation that believed they were too small to speak. It's for the world to remind us all. Truth doesn't need an army to be powerful. It just needs to be spoken. And once it is, there's no going back. So whether the world chooses confrontation or dialogue, submission or sovereignty, the game has changed. Iran didn't just challenge a superpower, it challenged an illusion. And now that illusion is crumbling and something new is being born. One truth at a time. Thank you for walking through this moment with clarity, with courage, and with your heart open. May the truth continue to guide you. May your voice never be silenced. And may you always stand where justice lives. Stay strong, stay aware, and above all, never fear speaking what the world refuses to hear. Good luck, and may your soul always walk with purpose.